Welcome to Collectibles.com Unscripted. My name is Blaine, and this is Ryan, and we are the community and content managers for Collectibles.com. You may have heard some of our content or seen some of our content on the channel. We do a lot of shorts, things like that, but we thought it'd be a great idea to just talk to you guys today about who we are, why we collect, why we love collecting, and what kind of items mean the world to us. So, how's it going, Ryan?
It's going good, man. I mean, it's a great morning here over in South Florida, and I am just excited to do this. And get to we know so much about each other already, but to learn a little bit more and to tell the community a little bit more about us and who we are as collectors is going to be so much fun.
South Florida, I'm up here in Pittsburgh, so you're getting some of the better weather down there, I think.
Well, I mean, luckily I'm in South Florida because North Florida is not getting good weather right now. They're actually enduring probably some tropical storm stuff.
We're getting a bunch of tornadoes. It's probably a good trade-off for you.
Did you go see Twisters during a tornado?
You know what? I have not seen Twisters yet. I wanted to. I was going to see it at a drive-in up here because I felt kind of appropriate. But
yeah, that's appropriate for sure. Absolutely.
yeah, they ended up doing a bunch of like animated weekends where they only showed like Despicable Me and things like that. So yeah, I think I'll just have to bite the bullet and see that one on streaming. But all right, so kicking things off. So Ryan, what kind of things do you collect?
As you can see, I have a bunch of Funko Pops, but I collect all sorts of stuff now. Throughout the years of collecting, I've started collecting vinyl records, some movies, movie steelbooks, physical media. How can you not do physical media nowadays? Especially with like stuff like the Xbox store going down and everything. So it's one of those things where it's like to have that physical copy, physical media is just it's something. It's tangible, So I collect some of that stuff. I don't go too crazy with it because it can get very pricey very fast. I also collect manga as well as Lego and, just a couple other things here and there that I've found myself collecting. If you can see, like, way above up here, I have, like, little chibi figures as well as some anime, like, statues of some characters I really like. So, yeah, I collect all that stuff. I'm not really a card person when it comes to collecting, but I do appreciate the artwork and, the style that goes into these type of cards.
So obviously, kind of the thread that runs through this seems to be a lot of love of anime and that kind of animation, that kind of entertainment. So what really initially drew you to anime, or what did you really find cool about it? Like, when did you start watching?
So it's funny because a lot of people, my age are like, hey, like my first anime was Dragon Ball, and I was like, I'm like thinking like back and I'm like, was my first anime Dragon Ball? And I'm like, wait, I don't think so technically. There was a show and it was about hamsters. It's called Hamtaro, and it's a little orange hamster dude. And his little like hamster friends. I think Hamtaro and his hamster friends or something like that was like the theme song or whatever. And I don't know, that just grabs me as a little kid. I was probably I don't know when Hamtaro came out, but I was probably like 4 or 5 years old if I had to guess. It was early in the mornings on like Cartoon Network. I think it was like past the Toonami block, but it was before Cartoon Network technically started, I want to say. So that's when Hamtaro aired. Of course, I watched Dragon Ball Z. I had a neighbor across the street from us growing up that played and watched Dragon Ball Z all the time. And he's probably, if I had to guess, like probably like 4 or 5 years older than me, maybe a little less. But he would introduce me to the games and the anime and the dub and the sub and like all this different stuff about anime. And I was like, whoa, I was like, this is interesting because as an American, you hear just English, 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 so it was like when I heard a Japanese like voice, like, and some subtitles, and I'm like, wait, what is going on? And it's like, well, anime is primarily Japanese, and this is what the Japanese animators draw and how they draw and stuff. And it was just like, wow, this is interesting. And then it like made me realize, I was like, wait, so isn't that like Pokemon and like Hamtaro and like Digimon and stuff like that? And it's like, okay, I've been watching, anime for quite a while now, I felt like, because it was just one of those things that really drew me to it. It was the animation style. I wanted to be an animator growing up, but I could not draw for the life of me, more or less.
All right, so you have that love of anime. What did you start collecting first? Did you start doing manga and things like that, or did you start doing Funko Pops? Because they've both been around for a hot minute. So,
Man, I had manga. I wish, and this is the thing, because I grew up with separated parents, so I had a lot of things at one house, I had a lot of things at another house. Um, and when I moved out, a lot of those things stayed at the house, and I never got them. But I had, you know, a bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Obviously, growing up in the early 2000s, I watched Yu-Gi-Oh all the time, and Pokemon, of course. So I had the cards, but I was more into Yu-Gi-Oh than I was Pokemon, for sure. So I'd say that was like my first collectible. And then when I started like really reading and getting into things, I started getting some manga here and there, which I wish I still had, because I don't know what happened to this stuff. I don't know where it got donated or lost along the lines. My parents still live. My dad still lives at the house he's lived at when I grew up, but my mom moved, in with my stepdad. So it's just one of those things where I was like, where did my stuff go? It was like, and I go back and I try to look through photos. I'm like, hey mom, where did this stuff go? And she's like, well, like you said you didn't want this, or you didn't. And it's just like, being a little bit older now, I'm like, damn it, I wish I would have held on to that stuff. But yeah, as far as like manga and everything, I had a couple copies. I started, my very first manga was anime slash manga called Shaman King. It came out, I want to say it was like early 2000s. It was an anime as well, that wasn't completely finished yet because the manga wasn't finished yet. So they rebooted it back in 2021, I think it was. And I just finished watching it like a couple months ago, and it was not a good reboot. It was so like, it was choppy, and just like I like the original a lot better, to be honest. And growing up, it's a little bit more nostalgic for me. But yeah, that was my first manga. I got into it was Shaman King, and then I read one that I wasn't supposed to be reading called I think it's pronounced Sergeant Frog, but it was SGT Frog. I wasn't supposed to be reading that one. And Naruto.
yeah, I've heard about Sergeant Frog before. I've heard. I don't know anything about it. I do know that whenever I go to like conventions and things like that, and they have some of the voice actors, it seems to have a pretty diehard fan base, and people want to have more seasons of it or something like that. Again, not knowing anything about it, this is just an outsider looking in. It looks like it's kind of a big deal to the real anime heads out there. So
Yeah, it was one of the first manga that I read. It was interesting for sure.
I guess let's talk about the elephant in the room. You have a lot of pop figures. How many would you say that you have roughly?
I've probably gotten up to 1,000 before. I've sold a bunch, moving, houses. I'd say I'm probably anywhere in between probably 600 and 700 at this point. Usually my number is like 800 kind of, but yeah, I'd say probably 600 to 700 at this point.
And now what's interesting, we can talk about this a little bit once we get more to my segment, but as I have a lot of Funkos too, but as you can see, I am Team Box, and you seem to be Team No Box. So
Yeah.
what's the reasoning there for not keeping them?
I've always, I've been collecting for 12 years now. And I collected in box for so long, and it was just like stacked like yours. And no offense to the people that stack their boxes or anything. It was just, it got a little messy for me. And when I'm moving houses and stuff, I moved into a townhouse, and I had to downsize, quite a bit. But it's like I didn't want to get rid of my pops, so I recycled probably 60% of these boxes, to be honest. At this townhouse, when we first moved in, I first started kind of displaying my stuff, and my father-in-law helped me, and we built these like 8-foot shelves, that were like 4 foot wide. So there's some big shelves, and I had like 4 of them stacked up. I'll try to see if I can find a photo to insert for this, but it was just one of those things where I was like, oh, I love this. Like, this is great. And the rest of the boxes I had, you can see a little bit behind me here with the rest of the boxes that I had, I actually like used those for like the levels, of like details, where you finally found Target last year, or I think 2 years ago, they started putting these out. They're little like stairs, and these are perfect for pops. They're like $5 a piece, and they're little wooden stairs, and they work so well. You get like 3 on each level. But yeah, that was just one of the things where I was just like, I kind of ran out of room, and I had too many pops at the time, and I was collecting way too much at the time because I wasn't such a anime, Disney parks, some video game, and other like little things here and there collector. I was more of a, oh, I like this. Oh, this is great. Oh, this is going to be worth money someday type thing. If I had a time machine, I think most Funko collectors that I've been, friends with for a long, long time can say this. If we had a time machine, we'd go back and buy up that stuff and be able to sell it, a couple years later for a couple grand. It was just like, I've had stuff that's worth $5,000 today, like Planet Arlie Vegeta. I've had some Freddy Funkos that are really expensive. It's just one of those things where going through the age of collecting and collecting Funko Pops and the market for it was just one of those things where it's like, wow. It's like, as a collector in 2012, nobody would have known this would have happened. I went to a Blockbuster. Yes, a Blockbuster. And found the Golden Master Chief Blockbuster exclusive pop. Yes, there is a Blockbuster exclusive pop from Halo. And I think it was $9.95 retail. I sold it a couple months later. As a kid, I was only, I think 15. And I sold it for $60. I thought I was making payday, man. I was so excited. I was like, whoa, like, this is awesome and all this stuff. Yeah, that same pop is like, or at least it was like over $1,000 now.
Yeah, my first Funko was the San Diego Comic-Con Dark Phoenix, so one of the original ones, and they had to be a couple thousand at one point, and that's kind of when we Gene and I parted ways, so to speak. But yeah, so what was your very first Funko figure that you saw, and kind of what drew you to it as just a collectible? Like, what was the appeal for you?
I've talked about this a lot, but I had my eye on them for a long time. I go into Barnes and Noble, and sometimes they'd be at Walgreens and stuff too every now and then. And you just walk around and you find them, they're staring at you, as they're staring at me now. And as a kid, I was like, oh, these are cool. Like as a teenager, I should say, these are really cool. And so on Christmas Eve of 2012, my girlfriend got me Halo 4 Master Chief and Halo 4 Red Spartan Warrior. And as we all know, as collectors, you go and you start one thing, but you're not going to stop right away because you want to find the rest of the set most of the time. Anyways, so I started off and I found Cortana at a GameStop to go with my Master Chief. I found the blue Spartan Warrior, but I never picked that one up because I had the red one. I was like, oh, I don't need to change colorways or whatever. But then we went to the Disney store, and the Disney store had Funko Pops for $2.50 on sale. So here's Ryan and grabbing up 4 or 5 Funko Pops, and Ryan easily had 10, and then a couple months later he had 30, and then a couple months later he had 80, and yeah, you could say it went all downhill from there. But it's like I said, when I first started collecting, it was like, ooh, shiny new pop figure for a great price, like type thing. And I like this character type thing. It wasn't like, yeah, I'm going to keep my lines to this and this only.
So with that now, I mean, do you focus on only a few different franchises? Do you focus on, or, a few different kind of like categories, or do you just kind of buy whatever catches your eye? Because that's, that's how a lot of collectors, they kind of have different mentalities as far as how they want to do things.
Yeah, so I was a completionist for quite a little while of, to like go off a little bit. I was a completionist quite a while for Hot Topic exclusive pop figures. No matter what it was, I was grabbing it. If it was a Hot Topic pre-release exclusive, meaning like it released a Hot Topic before any other store, or just a regular exclusive, I was grabbing it because they were coming out maybe like one or two every couple months. Now, as I'm sure you and a lot of the listeners know, Hot Topic exclusives, there's like 5 or 6 a day sometimes. You know, it's one of those things where I really started. I was like, wow, I have up to like 40 of these. And then I'm like, wow, I really don't care for half of these. You know, why am I collecting these ones? So, but nowadays, yeah, no, I'm a lot more niche to it. I spend my money a little bit more wisely when it comes to it, just due to the fact of like the marketing and like we said we're going to talk about like the marketing aspect of Funko. Like the value's gone down a little bit, but that's due to the fact of I can get a Funko Pop Chase right off the bat. If something comes out. And I could do a Chase bundle. It's $40 or $50, whatever it is, and I could get the Chase automatically, and I get the regular Pop automatically. Cool. I spent my money. But nowadays, it's like Funko is going to come out with that same exact Pop so many runs over, and you're going to find it just for retail more or less, or it's going to go all the way down in value to like $20, $15. It's like just a little bit over retail of a regular Pop. It's just one of those things where I'm not in a rush anymore if I do like something. So I'm not even buying stuff at retail really anymore because I know it's going to go on clearance. Like there's a Sonic 2-pack that I want, a Sonic the Hedgehog 2-pack, which is Knuckles and Rouge. It's a GameStop exclusive. Most GameStop exclusive Pop figures go on sale. So I'm not paying, I think it's $28, $30 retail when I can get it. And let's say by Black Friday of this year for $20, $15, $18, whatever it is, it's one of those things where it's just the limited availability just isn't a factor anymore that it was back in the day. And Pops are, as Pops are everywhere, dude. And the same thing with like STCC exclusives. They're everywhere.
Yeah, they used to be kind of a nightmare to find them, and now they've made them much more accessible, which is good, to help everybody get some, but it also kind of definitely hits the resale value down the line a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not all about value in a sense, but if I'm paying for that, retail, like why? That's the biggest thing. Why is my biggest why? Because it's like my life has changed so much. It's like now I have 2 kids, like I have a wife, like I'm not just a kid anymore collecting toys. I'm a kidult, as they all say, but we all have those responsibilities we have to take care of first.
And now you get to share everything with your from your kidult collection with your actual kids.
I do, no, and that's so much fun too. Being a dad, as a collector is a lot of fun because yeah, there's some pieces I don't want him to touch, that are kind of off limits, but at the same time, it's like, let him be a kid, man. Let him be a kid. Have fun, We're gonna build a Lego, and it's gonna take us 2 hours to build. If you break it, I hope I held onto that instruction booklet. Is all I could say.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you got the instructions to put it back together, you should be all right. And so you also do Lego stuff, as you mentioned. Like, what kind of sets do you collect for those? Is it focused on one category, or how many do you have? Is it as expansive as your Pop collection?
It's not as expansive. I am trying. They don't really have too many like anime sets, so obviously I'm trying to like have my fun pop culture stuff like that I love that isn't anime on that side of things with Lego. So like I'm not trying to collect Star Wars because there's way too many of those. Love Star Wars, but yeah, no. I have some Marvel sets. Like I have the Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness set that still needs to be built. I also have the new Spider-Man No Way Home set with all the 10 minifigures. That's the Statue of Liberty, absolutely amazing set. And that's still not built yet. But we've been getting into a little bit of like the Lego Super Mario ones because my son really likes the little Mario character. So we've been getting into those, as well as Sonic the Hedgehog is a huge fandom for me, huge fandom for my son. My love of these franchises is poured out onto him. And I didn't even technically start him on it. He saw me playing Mario Kart one day. He was enamored. He saw me playing Sonic one day. He was enamored. And I don't even play video games that much, but it's just one of those things where he felt the love of this from me, and he took it. And not to mention, though, Sonic and Mario are on everything, kids his age. Like, they push that fandom and franchise and brand out so much. I tell you. But yeah, let's talk about you, Blaine. You're a collector too.
I have a few things, as you may be able to see around me. So, some things I collect. I mean, a lot of things I collect is everything Pokemon. I collect a lot of Pokemon video games, which we'll probably end up talking about a little bit. I collect trading cards as well. Magic and Pokemon are the big ones. A little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh in there and some other, miscellaneous ones. I have quite a few Funko Pops, although I will say I don't keep up with it nearly as much as you do. And my interests on it are a bit more scattered. I don't quite follow a particular line unless it's very small or something I really care about. And other than that, I also do some Star Wars stuff. I have some lightsabers you can probably see poking out behind me. So, yeah, really anything that I kind of find interesting, I'll at least kind of dip my toe in the water and maybe add some of it to my collection.
So when did you start collecting? Like, how did you start?
Well, I come from kind of a family of collectors. I mean, mainly more on my dad's side. He had a bunch of books. He also collected paintings. If I find a picture, I'll throw it in the video. But my dad had so many paintings. His house looked like something out of like Willy Wonka, is the best way I can put it. His walls looked like jigsaw puzzles. So yeah, anything like that, it kind of, I guess, rubbed off on me. But I mean, one of the first games I started playing was Pokemon. And, as most kids who grew up in the 90s, I mean, I was born in 88, but I did grow up in the 90s and I started playing Pokemon Red. I got it for Christmas. And that kind of started me down the, wanting to get all the Pokemon games, that kind of stuff. And then when it became a card game, obviously that was, they really got their branding down right with that, gotta catch them all, gotta get them all kind of thing where, I got that and I was kind of hooked. And kind of the joke I'll sometimes make is that, with Magic, that kind of with Pokemon, that kind of transitioned me into Magic a little bit. Then I started playing that. In my teens, I kind of felt like Pokemon was a little uncool, which a lot of kids did just because, it was cool to hate on things that you liked as a kid.
Now look at us, though.
Yeah, right? Yeah, for better or worse.
Truly, the nerds are superior. Absolutely. You see it everywhere now. You go into those cool kid stores and you're like, hey, I know exactly what that is. And I've been watching it, or I've been doing it for 20 plus years now.
And yeah, but I mean, it just kept going from there. I had the cards, video games I appreciated. And then kind of as I got a little bit older, my taste also kind of refined a little bit. And I started collecting some different things like coins and currency that I think is just interesting. And I even have a few bottles of Prohibition era whiskey down in my basement. So yeah, kind of a little bit of everything that kind of makes up my collection. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you talked about getting into Pokemon and Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh. What made you become a player in like a pro? I've been told you are a pro at these. Like, that's crazy.
yeah, so I started playing Magic in high school and kind of just didn't really take it very seriously, but it was fun. And they used to have a program called Friday Night Magic, and you could basically you would go play 4 rounds against people in your area, and then you can get a promo card, things like that. And at the time, it was kind of for me, it was kind of addictive just because you can finally get some action. I don't want to sound like, one of those like, hardcore nerds, but one of the, you can see some actual competition as opposed to like the kids at the school who are kind of like, not that great. And it was kind of fun too because a lot of the people at the store were like, in their early 20s who were playing. So I'm strolling in like 15, 16, playing against a bunch of older kids, and I thought it was like real cool, and I was kind of a badass, ironically
Hey, there
enough.
you go.
But yeah, it went from there. I kept playing throughout college, and what happened is I ended up actually breaking my leg, and I was pretty much out of commission for almost a whole year. So I didn't have a lot to do at the time just because there wasn't a whole bunch, but there was a card shop by my house. Shout out to Adventure Cards and Comics in Buffalo, New York. It no longer exists, but that was it was a very small store in a really bad neighborhood, right next to a tattoo parlor.
Nice.
And that store had probably 100 diehard players, and maybe 20 of them hit the Pro Tour at some point. So it
Wow.
became pretty wild. Yeah. So
Wow.
I ended up, they have a format called drafting where you open up a pack, pass the cards around, and you build your deck out of the cards that you choose to take from the cards going around. And I basically, while I was in the healing process, I would basically go and draft 3, 4 times a day just to pass my hobbies. And I would basically, I didn't have any real money, so I would just sell the cards back to get entry into the next event and just keep playing. And by the time I was done, I realized I had gotten kind of good, and I had known kind of all the mysteries that format had to offer. So I went to a Pro Tour qualifier in Butler, Pennsylvania, ironically not far from where I live now, and I ended up winning the whole thing. I didn't lose one game the entire day, and I got to go to Japan, and I played in Kyoto on the Pro Tour, and then I rode that for a little bit. So I got to go to Malaysia, Sweden. So that was
Wow.
really, really cool to get to kind of tour a little bit and do that, and then
That's really cool, man. From a collector to a pro.
and it's we say pro, but I mean it was just you got to play with some higher ups. That's the cool part. And
Hi, I mean, shoot, you went overseas. Like, that's nuts.
yeah, that was the. I remember I had to go tell my mom and my dad at the time. I was like, "Hey, I'm going to Japan. I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. I'm going all alone. I don't know anybody there. I don't speak the language, and I got about $400 worth of yen. So I'll see you when I get back."
Was anything like paid for that or no?
Yeah, so they paid for the airfare. I paid for the hotel, which they were real cheap at the time, and it was nice. So overall, it was pretty good. Like getting around was fairly cheap, and kind of once the word got out, like that year. So I was leaving to go to Japan in February, and I remember for Christmas, kind of the word got out. So like under the tree, I remember there was no presents except like a stack of envelopes like this, and they were all crammed with yen that people had gotten from like different currency exchange places around our area. So
That helped just a bit, right?
yeah, a little bit. It wasn't still there wasn't that much crazy. It wasn't like a ton, but it was enough to kind of at least let me do a little sightseeing and things like that. But yeah, it was a really good time, and I still enjoyed it. I went from that into doing judging to help kind of run the events, and then parlayed that into my career for a little bit. So it was kind of an interesting expansion of that hobby.
Wow. That's great. No, I love to hear that. That's awesome, man. So you talked about the cards, and you mentioned video games, and of course, being a gamer in the Pokemon lifestyle that you had slash have now. You still have a bunch of those games, I see, or you collect those, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I always really liked handheld games. So Pokemon obviously was on the Game Boy, and much like you, my parents got divorced. So like, even though I had stuff like an N64, things like that, it was impractical to keep hauling it back and forth and having to plug it in. So it always just was easier to have a Game Boy and a whole bunch of batteries on me, and I could play it on the car ride over to whoever's house. So it wasn't such a bad deal, all things considered. But yeah, I kind of again dropped off a little bit when I was a teen, and then once I was kind of back in college. Now this is going to date myself a little bit, but I was in a suite with, they had 4 suites or 4 rooms in a suite, and each room had 2 people, so we had 8 people. And this was right when the DS came out, and there was wireless functionality now, and Diamond and Pearl had just dropped. So I remember my roommate coming in, and he was like, "Dude, listen up. They have a DS. We can play wirelessly, all 8 of us at the same time. And there is a legendary Pokemon that's a ghost and a dragon," which was Giratina. And he knew I liked ghost and dragon Pokemon at the time. Those were some of my favorites as a kid. So I remember we all went to Walmart. Collectively, we each spent like $300. And so Walmart had a real good day because we cleaned out almost their entire DS selection for
Oh
her
my
suite.
God.
And then, yeah, that kind of got me back into it. And then just kind of playing a little bit here and there. I started like Pokemon X and Y, Black and White. I started playing those kind of casually. And then I kind of wanted to go back and fill in some of the gaps. So I still had the original games from when I was a kid. This is my first ever Pokemon game. This is Pokemon Red. Actually still have it. And Pokemon Blue. and yellow. I remember I got all those as a kid. It was a big deal to have all three.
Oh wow. Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of go back and fill in some of the other gaps. So I started collecting, like, I went back and made sure I got gold, silver, and crystal because I never had crystal as a kid. And then I wanted to get some of the fill-in ones. And then I wanted to make sure I had all the main series games so I could go play them whenever and then have a system to play them. And then kind of what happened, I started looking at it and I'm like, well, I already have the main series done and it really wasn't that expensive, quite frankly. And at the time, nowadays they're much more pricey. And then I was like, well, what if I just get every Pokemon game ever made? So
Wow. Okay, that's cool. Like including like Ranger and Mystery Dungeons and like
yep,
all that stuff.
there are, Snap Stadium, Ranger Mystery Dungeon,
Coliseum.
Dash, Coliseum,
Yeah.
Pokemon Rumble. That was one that's
Oh yeah. The DS one.
yeah. And then as I started looking into this, because I started buying some of the easy ones like Hey You Pikachu, which that don't even get me started on that one. Pokemon Snap, some of the other ones that are much easier to get. And kind of once I got to be 75% done, I started really doing a deep dive and realized that some of these were going to be very hard to get. Reason why, a lot of them were Japan only. And like for Pokemon Stadium, for example, our Pokemon Stadium 1 is their Pokemon Stadium 2. And the original Pokemon Stadium they released was kind of like our first Mortal Kombat. It only had like a handful of characters, not that many, really basic. And then that's why in the US they were like, let's not even bother with it. And then when they released the sequel that had all 151, they were like, okay, now we'll use this one and that's ours. But some of the tough ones, I mean, Pokemon Box, I actually have behind me here. That's kind of like Pokemon Bank or Pokemon Home back on the GameCube. And what they would actually do, you could physically transfer your Pokemon off of your Game Boy Advance game onto a
memory card?
A GameCube memory card. So you could use that to have more storage for your characters. And that game was only sold at the Pokemon Center in New York City for a very limited time, so it's very hard to find. And Japan also got a lot of exclusive games, like, the Pokemon card, trading card game, Game Boy game.
Yeah.
They had a sequel to that in Japan where they introduced more sets and, like, you had to fight Team Rocket. So, like, that was kind of a tricky one to find. You mentioned Pokemon Coliseum. They had a different bonus disc over there that was different from the one here. So you had to buy the games to get all of those. And kind of once I got a lot of once it kind of got really close to being done, I was very excited to kind of get, finish it up and kind of get the last couple. And if you want to talk about, some of the weird games that are overseas, I got a couple I'll show you. So first of all, have you ever heard of Pokemon Typing Adventure?
I think I've heard of it, yeah. For sure.
It is a Pokemon game that came with a wireless keyboard for the DS. And what it is, you type names of Pokemon and you catch them. It's basically a rail shooter. And the goal of this is to teach people how to type. So it only came out in Japan and in Europe. In Japan, they had the black keyboard here. And in Europe, they had the white keyboard. And it was using Pokemon from black and white. And it's surprisingly a lot of fun. They made actually a game like this in the early 2000s called Typing of the Dead, which was House of the Dead 3 for PC. And the idea was to teach people how to type, and instead of killing a zombie, you'd have to type out a word like spaghetti or like, hydrogen, and that's how you would kill different zombies. And then somebody at Pokemon was like, that's the next idea, let's do it. And the only problem is, you may not know this too, English Pokemon names are not the same in every country. So, like Bulbasaur, we know Bulbasaur. In Japan, it's Fushigi Dane, which means strange seed or something like that. So, if you want to type, even though the keyboard has an English setting you can use, you need to type the Japanese name. And some people don't know what that is, so they can find the game a little bit challenging if it's not your native country. So if you ever do want to get these, I highly recommend looking for one in either Europe or some of the other English-speaking Europe countries, because that's probably going to make your life a little easier.
That's great. That's very cool.
The one thing people don't know about that is also really hard to get is when I was looking for the international things, I found that in Japan only, Sega had an edutainment video game console called the Sega Pico and then the Sega Bina. And what it is, it's kind of like almost like a leapfrog type thing. And what it was, they had books that you would put into your like system, and it would teach you how to basic stuff like how to count, how to do whatever. But what it was, each book had a page, and when you turned the page, that would unlock a new mini game for you to play. And these things, they're not super expensive, but they're super rare because nobody bothered to hang on to them. But the cool thing is, they made, I believe, 7 Pokemon games for it. So technically, there are Sega-produced Pokemon games. So here is one of them. This is for the Pico. They have really long and complicated names, like Pikachu's Electrifying Adventure, Learn How to Count, something like that. As you can see, it says Sega Toys on there. And the newer ones, this is actually the Picos. This is like the early one, but the one for the Bina has a more modern Sega-looking logo on there, which is cool. And I will actually open this up. The booklet looks like this. And then you would literally turn the page, and there's more art and things like that to unlock some new mini game. It's very random and very niche, and not a lot of people even know it really exists. But I was able to get 5 out of the 7, and I'm trying to find the last 2. They show up on eBay every now and then, and they either have a very reasonable price and somebody snatches it immediately, or somebody has like a horribly gouging price on there. But yeah, I did manage to complete it. Now I have every single Pokemon game ever made. A few of them are still sealed, with the exception of the 2 Japanese games that I'm still trying to find. But for all the normal, like what I would say real Pokemon games, I have all of those. And then I started collecting some other games. And it's funny you mentioned your step thing with your Funkos. I started collecting pretty much everything for handheld, for Game Boy and things like that. And I wanted a way to display them like that. And they didn't have little steps for Game Boy cartridges. So I ended up finding some nail polish holders on Amazon.
A lot of people, like back in the day, would use like a spice rack. Yeah. A lot of people would use a spice rack back in the day, basically.
And luckily, it ended up with this, and it actually looks pretty nice. I do have a couple extra copies of like gold and silver on there that I just pick up because people like them and I like to trade.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, it actually was pretty nice, and they were cheap for how much they can hold. The only problem is once you get all the games on there, they weigh a ton.
So, what is your rarest game that you have?
Well, rarity versus value is kind of a tricky thing to think about.
I was going to get into value afterwards.
Well, as far as the rarest, it's probably the Pico and the Bina or Pokemon Box. Only because they're just so limited and they didn't have a wide release audience. Other than that, I also have the Eon ticket, which isn't a game, but it's for the e-reader. You would scan it and get things in the game. There were a lot of them made, but because it is a piece of paper that you're swiping like a credit card, most of them got destroyed. So there's not a lot of them left that you can find, at least in decent shape. So because of that, that's probably creeping up on the rarity list, but definitely Pokemon Box, that one I mentioned before, is up there. And then I have a complete Pokemon Red, which is reasonably rare these days, and it just is a huge nostalgia hit. So
yeah, huge, absolutely. So we talk about rares. What is the most valuable game then?
That's a good one. So the Pokemon Box game that I talked about can be anywhere between $1,000 and $2,000 sealed, which is pretty good. I mean, it depends, kind of on condition of the box and everything. Mine's in pretty good shape. Again, that one does tend to fluctuate because with it being a rarer title, a lot of times the interest isn't quite there the same way it is for like a Pokemon Red. I had a Pokemon Red that I actually sold. It was graded. It was a 9.6 graded, and I think I sold it for $9K a while ago. But I still have a graded Pokemon Yellow, and that's quite high on the list. That's at least, probably several thousand at this point. So,
wow,
that's something I'm pretty happy with. But
that's
a lot of them have
cool.
gone up. Even the loose cartridges, like you can see gold sometimes going for like $60-$70 just loose.
Well, it's like I'm walking around these conventions and like Crystal is like, I see like with a box and everything is like $700, and I'm just like, whoa. I'm like, is that overpriced or is that price? You know?
I mean, to be fair, it's probably a little bit of both. So the third games always get a little more hype. It's kind of a fun, it's kind of a weird paradigm because in the first generation, Red and Blue, everybody loved Red and Blue more than Yellow because those were like the first ones, you know? But after that, it kind of started with where the version differences were more pronounced. So with like Gold and Silver, there was a big difference. But like with Crystal, you can get both the birds, you know, or something like that.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Usually the remakes or the third edition, Ruby Sapphire then Emerald, they oftentimes hyped up kind of that legendary that wasn't featured before, and it kind of gave them a lot of extra like oomph in their popularity. Like for example, Rayquaza is extremely popular, more so I would argue than Groudon or Kyogre, and that's why everybody loves Emerald, and that's why that game is so expensive. Giratina was the same way. They haven't really done third editions in a long time, but it's interesting that that's kind of how it worked, and with Crystal especially, it's just that game that has a lot of cool features. Everybody really likes it, and the issue I think growing up, a lot of kids had Gold or Silver and then they probably couldn't, a lot of times with parents they couldn't afford to get the third one, and the parents are like, well, you already have this one, they're pretty much the same thing.
It's true. I think the biggest thing with the Crystal one when it first came out was always like, ooh, the shiny factor. That was the first like game where it's like, oh yeah, we have a colored like cartridges and whatever, but then Crystal was like, oh, this has like like shine to it, like crystal, translucent. Like that was the coolest thing.
They really went above and beyond with that one because it's crazy. I think, do I even have one handy? It's probably on my shelf. But yeah, so what they did with Crystal, it's transparent blue and it has sparkles on the case, and then they put Suicune was the legendary for the game, and Suicune has a head crest that's shaped like a gem or something like that. They actually put that on the circuit board, and you could see it through the plastic on the game. And it was just like the level of detail they put into it. Like they really I mean, at the end of the day, it's all bells and whistles. It doesn't really, have anything.
The more you know, though, like I didn't know that. That's so cool.
And then, yeah, so the thing about being a Pokemon video game collector is you have to have a little bit of a crash course in, electrical knowledge because they have batteries, and when you lose the battery, when it dies, you'll lose all the Pokemon on that game for some of the early ones.
Wow. I thought you were going to talk about it being rare or real or fake, but that's a very interesting take too.
We can get on that in a second. So
Yeah.
what they did was, with the original Pokemon games, they couldn't figure out how to save data when the game turns off. So their solution was, let's just not ever turn it off. We'll put a little battery on there and keep a portion of the memory awake. And that's how you save your original Pokemon. You'll turn the system off, but the game is always on. So like this copy of Blue, I just changed the battery a little while ago, but for 20 years, effectively the memory of this thing was on and going to keep my Pokemon from when I was, 9, 10 years old still on there. And that's how they did it. So when the battery died, everything went kaput. Now what you can do, which I did, if you have a Game Boy Advance, the oblong one.
Yeah, of course.
You can take the circuit board out and slide it in so the game has power, and then change the batteries so you don't lose all your stuff.
Oh my
which I did with
God.
this.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah. And then luckily what they started doing down the road. So that issue applies to Red, Blue, Yellow, Gold, Silver, and Crystal. That applies to all of them. Once they started getting into
The Game Boy Advance games, Ruby,
Game Boy
Sapphire,
Advance, so this is
Emerald.
Pokemon Emerald. Once I started getting into these, the battery only controlled the clock. So if your battery died, you would lose some of the like rare things in games. So like your, day-night spawns wouldn't work really well. And in Gen 3, they had something called Faraway Island where you could actually go and get a Mew. That would never show up if your clock doesn't work. Otherwise, it's like a lottery, and there's, you never know if you're going to get it or not. But
Wow.
with that one in particular, yeah.
That's so cool to know.
But you got to keep all your Pokemon, so it was a bit of a trade-off. It was still good that you didn't lose everything if your battery died.
Fun fact, my Pokemon Emerald game, that was back when like the action replay kind of like came out, so that was like the first time so I was at summer camp and this kid was like, yeah, I got an action replay, so he brought it one day And then he was like, "Oh yeah, man." He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna load some Pokemon on your thing. If it's okay with you, I'm gonna load them overnight, and I'll come back tomorrow, and all this stuff." Yeah, he never came back to summer camp, and I lost Emerald forever.
Oh, that's brutal.
And fun fact, another fun fact though, that was my second copy of Emerald because my first copy of Emerald I left at a hotel in Disney.
Yeah, I had some near misses with my games being missing, but usually I always found them. The one thing I always find is if you see a lot of secondhand games online, I don't know why, I don't know if it was just me and I was like a really like, anal retentive picky kid. A lot of times online the stickers are like destroyed. I have played Pokemon Red hundreds of times and like it is in pretty good shape. So I don't know what kids were doing, what kind of
I know exactly what you're saying, like the scrapes and like scratches
Yeah.
in these games, yeah.
And like, did they not look when they were trying to put it in the Game Boy and
They're
just
just
like blind feel?
like, yeah.
But yeah, and then you were talking about real or fake stuff previously.
We can go into that.
Yeah.
For sure.
With any game and anything Pokemon, there are a ton of counterfeits, and you can even tell. So I actually collect fake games too because I think they're kind of interesting, and you can get them.
I was
cheap.
gonna ask that because there's so many fake Pokemon games.
And so I have here. This is a fake Pokemon Red, and it doesn't look bad for what it is. But we'll get a little side by side going so you can actually see the difference here. So for one, the sticker art is different. It's a different kind of. I'm gonna see if I can get my camera to. There we go. So you can see this one is fake. This one is real. So they have a little bit of different art. It also on the top says Game instead of Game Boy.
Oh.
And it's pretty hard to tell on camera, but the hue of red is a little off. And then like the one thing I can feel, I've never actually done this until right now, the circuit board is like sharp. So like this one doesn't hurt my hand if I'm holding it, whereas the other one feels like kind of like I'm holding a razor blade. Like it feels like it's just, I'm not cut, but it's like you can tell it's like has the potential to kind of do some harm. But
Nice.
I collect a lot of those, and the reason why I collect these too, with fan games or like prompts, things like that you can make like your ROM hacks. A lot of times it's cheaper for the manufacturers to put their ROM hacks onto bootleg games because that way they don't have to buy and effectively destroy a real one, which more power to them. And Pokemon has a lot of fan games out there. They have
Oh yeah.
they have Pokemon Radical Red, which is like a super hard version of Red that has all the Pokemon in it. There is Pokemon Snakewood, where it's like it takes place in a zombie apocalypse. So like when you beat up on the younger trainers, they come back later super strong as zombies. There is what is it called? Shoot, I think it's called Pokemon like Dark Ascension or something. It's basically your Pokemon can go to like level 300 and get like crazy strong, and it's like nuts. So yeah, but to detect them, you always want to look for on the circuit board. It'll always say Nintendo. You want to look for those, and then the labels should always be sparkly. That's one thing Pokemon always did really well, is kind of putting a little bit of polish on their games. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't collect fake Funko Pops. I don't think I have any here, actually. I've come across fakes before, of course. But yeah, that's always a thing with Funko, too. Like, so yeah, talking about like real and fake Pops. I don't know if they really made any fakes of this one necessarily. But here's a pop box. It's literally a box. I don't know where the plastic insert is for this one. But you have like the pop logo, and you have a gradient to it and everything, and then there's like, you can't see it on camera, but there's like circles in it, of course. So it's one of those things where it's like, if the gradient's off, if it doesn't have like the little tiny circles in the pop figure logo, it's obviously fake. You have some like topography down here. If that looks a little bit different, that's gonna be fake. And then like you have just like a reflective like shine to it, and if that's not there, that's definitely a sign of a pop being fake. But yeah, it's not super. There are like pops that are out there that are so like made fake all the time, and there's a lot more differences and stuff. You can go into that, but that's just like the gist of it, like quickly. And then as far as like we talked about the rarest thing in your collection, when it comes to the Pokemon games, this is going to be mine. It is Freddy Funko. It is 1 out of 96 made from 2012 San Diego Comic-Con Funko Fun Days, which is a party that is held at San Diego Comic-Con every year. and he's V for Vendetta, is what this Freddy Funko is. And like I said, there's 96 made, but I'm sure there isn't 96 around anymore. You know, like a lot of older things. You know, this is a bobblehead, which you know, is usually a licensor thing, but for some reason, this one and a couple of other Freddy Funkos are bobbleheads.
That's really cool. And kind of how you mentioned, keeping things around. That's part of what I appreciate is one of the big issues with a lot of the Pokemon stuff that I collect too. The games are not meant to last, really, if you think about it. And the reason why, I mean, it's just kind of the limitations of the technology. For example, so Pokemon batteries can, eventually swell and then the acid can leak out and destroy the circuit boards. So any Pokemon game that's out there theoretically has a ticking time bomb inside.
Wow.
So that's a problem. I don't know if you know what disc rot is, but it can happen to any sort of DVD, CD type disc. And what happens is there's basically like a filament that's spun around inside like a wire. Over time, especially in very hot, humid environments, so if you're in Pittsburgh or places like Mexico, that'll start to break down no matter how well you take care of it. And if you hold up your disc to the light, if you see little light coming through the disc, that's sign of early disc rot. And what'll happen is when you start to play it, you'll have skips, things are missing, especially on some of the higher levels, because that's kind of more in the middle of the disc as opposed to kind of the middle part. So yeah, it's just very interesting that there's so many things that can prevent it from being able to be saved. So for me, having an archival quality level of stuff is kind of a big deal. I want to make sure these things last because it's something that's endured so long that I think the physical media should be able to last too.
Yeah, no, yeah, for sure. When we talk about value of this, I'd say this is because we talked about the value of your highest. This is probably anywhere in between $1,000 and $2,000. I think it might be more because there's only 96 made and 500 pieces go for a certain amount and 400 pieces or 50 pieces or whatever. Because this year, at San Diego Comic-Con a couple of weeks ago, there's been one out of 100 pieces and one out of 50 pieces, and those go for quite a bit. So it's hey, this one's a little bit more rare, but it seems like they're not as sought after because I don't know. It's a weird market for sure when it comes to Freddy Funko.
That's something I've seen. It's not even just with the Funkos. It's just you get to a point sometimes where something is rare, but if the interest quite hasn't kept up with how rare it is, you may see that the prices are lower than something that is less rare, which is kind of a weird paradigm to look at that. But for example, with Pokemon cards, first edition Charizard in a high grade oftentimes can fetch more than something like a Pikachu Illustrator, which is a rarer card. And that's just because it's a Charizard. It's like the Cadillac of cards. Everybody knows, what it is, and they're like, oh, this guy's got Charizard. He's doing pretty well in life.
Yeah.
So that's why, that's kind of one of those little nerdy status symbols. But
yeah, my wife bought this one for me. Well, girlfriend at the time bought it for me for $40. So
that's pretty good.
It's crazy. Like I talked about investments earlier. It's one of those things where you didn't know. But she bought it for me. I loved it. I love V for Vendetta. It's a great movie. So yeah.
So as you guys can see, we are definitely both diehard collectors. We love what we do, and that's why we're here working on Collectibles.com to bring you guys the best content we can for an amazing app to help track your entire collection. So if you're like us and you have a ton of collectibles, head over to Collectibles.com. Any collectible is pretty much supported. You can track everything, get pricing information, learn a little bit more about your items, and even network with other collectors. It's awesome, and that's pretty much why we're here.
Including us. Make sure you follow us on Collectibles.
We're on there at Blaine and Ryan, so make sure you guys go out and give us a check. We'll put them on screen now, and my name is unique enough. If you just look for Blaine, there's a reasonable chance you'll just kind of end up finding it. So, but with that being said, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you guys have kind of enjoyed taking this little stroll down memory and collectibles lane with us. But that being said, guys, if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, give us a like, and feel free to share it with all your collectible friends. That really helps us out. If you're listening anywhere else over like on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your media, please make sure you like and follow us on those respective platforms so we can keep growing and bringing you more content like this. But with that being said, guys, that's all we have for you today. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'm Blaine and this is Ryan. And until next time, we will see you guys in the next podcast. So have a wonderful day. We'll see you around.
Bye.
See ya.